So how many of you have an idea of what you want to do for your dissertation research? One, two, okay, a lot of people. So I think this is going to be really helpful for you because, let me tell you something. If you're going to have someone like me as a dissertation chair, you know, like Crystal does, and a few other people I think from the cohort I'm probably going to be the dissertation chair for, and other people, what people are very often going to want to see on a committee is what exactly are you studying and how are you getting there? What exactly do you want to know? And what are the linkages between different variables that will tell you this is how something works? Because that's really what, in many ways, what a good dissertation is going to be doing. It's going to be providing an explanation of how and why something works the way that it does. Ideally, something that we did not previously had a clear answer for. You are going to be providing, hopefully, the first answer on a particular question. So we're going to play 3 scenarios right here. And if you have the slides, please don't read ahead because this is actually kind of fun. So, and just somewhere, just remember what your answers are. Now, imagine this. You have $1,000. Fantastic. And you can flip have a choice between the following. You can flip a coin, and if it's heads, you get $1,000. If tails, you get nothing. Or B, you can automatically get a guaranteed $500 without flipping a coin. Now just think to yourself really quickly, which option would you choose? And just remember what it is. Which option would you choose? Okay, we'll talk about this in a second. All right. Without saying anything, does everyone have an answer what they would do? All right, good. Hopefully everyone watching it at home does too, and you haven't gone ahead. Now we're going to do a slightly different scenario. Now we're going to, instead of talking about gaining money, now we're going to be talking about losing money. Now you have $2,000. I don't know how you got it, but you have $2,000. Let's just work with me, right? And again, you have a choice between the following. You can flip a coin, and if it's head, you lose $1,000. If tails, you lose nothing. Or you can just automatically choose to lose a guaranteed $500 without flipping a coin. Which option would you choose? Just write it down somewhere or remember. Okay. Everyone have what they would do? Okay, I assume that's a yes. Now we're going to go into the third scenario, my favorite. Imagine this. Don't worry about the logic of here of how we got into this situation, but just work with me here. We are sealed in this room. I don't know how we're sealed in this room, but we're sealed in this room. And we can't communicate. I don't know why we can't communicate. We just can't. It's just part of the rules. We just can't, right? And you somehow know the following. Every 2 hours, enough air is pumped into the room to allow everyone to breathe for the next 2 hours. And you also happen to know everyone will have enough air if everyone, A, breathes in for only 2 seconds at a time, and B, takes only 3 breaths per minute. So let's actually practice this really quickly. So let's everyone breathe in for 2 seconds. Breathe out. And you can only do that 2 more times each minute until the air is pumped in again at 2 hours. Which option would you choose? Choose exactly as specified above, breathe more than what is indicated above, or breathe less than what is indicated above. And just think about what you would do. This one's a little trickier, so we'll have a couple seconds to think about it. And just remember what you did. Okay, I fear it's actually from game theory. Okay. So for the one with getting money, how many of you chose option A, flip a coin? How many of you chose option B, get the guarantee? Fantastic. Okay, sorry. All right. I'm a nerd. I love this sort of stuff. I love research methodology, and this is just great stuff. For option B, for number the second scenario about losing money. How many of you chose to take your chances and flip a coin? Okay. How many of you chose to just get the guaranteed $500 loss? Interesting. Okay, even split. And for this one, and I realize there's also social acceptability bias right here, but we're going to work about this anyway. How many of you chose option A? You choose exactly as specified. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Oh, okay, interesting. How many of you would breathe more than what's indicated? Okay. Okay, fantastic. Okay, good. And how many of you would breathe less than what's indicated above? Okay, fantastic. You know, believe it or not, the results of this room actually parallel results that would happen in real life. Now, this would probably never get IRB approval to put people in a room and threaten to suffocate them. We'd have a lot of ethical concerns right there. I think it probably was a horror movie, right? Exactly. You know, M. Night Shyamalan did this, I think, didn't he? But here's the interesting thing about this, which really demonstrates a lot about the importance of conceptual frameworks and finding the research question, believe it or not. When tested across people, across genders, across ages, across cultures, across languages, it doesn't matter. Most people, for the first scenario, tend to choose option B. That is, choose to automatically get a guaranteed $500. Why do you think that is? Okay. Okay, right. Fantastic. Now the second one. With choosing to lose money. Most people choose to risk losing versus having the guaranteed loss. Most people choose to flip a coin and risk losing 1,000 or nothing versus taking the guaranteed $500 loss. Why do you think that is? Yeah, go ahead.
You also risk winning.
You also risk winning. Okay, I like that, yeah. So you already have money, so it's not as big a deal to lose it. Okay, anyone else? Okay. And of course, this last one deserves a smiley face, frowny face, excuse me, frowny face. If real, most groups would die. That's pretty sad. That's pretty sad. Why? You already knew. I told you what to do. Why? Why would most people probably be in the situation of choosing to breathe more than less or exactly as specified? Yeah, Dan. Okay, the panic is definitely a possibility. Yeah? Yeah, go ahead.
I don't trust the other parties. They're going to breathe more too, so I'm going to breathe more.
Exactly.
Even though I know it means the demise of us all.
Interesting. Many implications for public administration there. Okay, yes, go ahead. Yes. Yes, please.
Yeah, it's a rational choice. I mean,
It's a rational choice.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, exactly. You know, believe it or not, it actually does become a rational choice. Even though self-rationality doesn't contribute to group rationality, and by not contributing to group rationality, you inadvertently come back and harm your own self-rationality. But it's still a rational choice. In fact, one guy named Thomas Schelling actually won a Nobel Prize based upon essentially that type of scenario. We didn't actually test the scenario, but saying a lot of these times when we think, oh, let's just have everyone do what's individually best for them and society will be wonderful. And he said, well, wait a minute, that's not actually the case because the collective can suffer, and then the collective suffers, and the individual suffers. So there's limits to rational choice right there. So again, why would people act that differently? Why would they act safely with a gain? Why would they act more riskily with a loss? Why would they engage in some sort of situation that if were real would actually probably kill them? And also, are these reasonable scenarios to examine the complexity of decision making? Believe it or not, these fun little scenarios, which I just love to do, they're actually classic reasons for why we need research. And even though they're kind of ridiculous scenarios that's used in game theory at times and so forth, they actually do demonstrate a lot of things that are important for you and why we're offering this workshop. Because these are classic reasons for research and also why we need theories. Namely, that we want to know how something works, why something works the way that it does, what might happen if, ... And, of course, also highlighting what Ladine and Crystal mentioned here, which is a particular power of a DPA, what can we recommend to improve things? Because those go back to decision-making theories. If you understand how people tend to make decisions, you can do what with that information? I'm sorry, what?
Predict.
Predict? Okay. Why would you want to predict? Trying to win the lottery? Yeah. Okay.
So I can make a guaranteed $500.
You could make a guaranteed $500, or at very least design policy in such a way that you're able to maximize benefits while minimizing costs in a lot of ways. And so also these slides are also on Blackboard, so I don't think there's any more games, so you can ruin the ending and not furiously scribble what I'm saying right here. Like I said, I love this stuff so much, I'm just going to nerd out. I'm just fair warning. Because let's look at it this way. Let's look at what you could do with those scenarios if you were armed with theoretical power. So you'd mentioned, what's your name? Kira, I like it. The rational model of decision making. That's a classical model of decision making used in economics. It's actually called the Homo economicus model, economic man. It's underpinning a lot of the theories of decision making, theories of the firm, and so forth. It goes on and on. It posits that people make decisions to maximize utility. That is, they make decisions for self-benefit or to maximize their good. Now, there's other little steps in there which are going to get into there, but do you basically agree with that? People do make those decisions in order to maximize benefit? Okay, if a person is rational, you could probably say, yes, they are trying to do that. If they're not doing that, well, then rational choice theorists would begin to question some of those assumptions. But rational choice theorists also make this point, that in order to maximize utility, people would have complete information, or at least nearly complete information. That's an essential ingredient for it, because information is the basic substance of decision making, of course. Have clear, non-conflicting preferences. That's also important. Rank order outcomes, and then choose the option that has the best utility. So basically, this is a model of decision making in which you would have complete information. Your preferences about what you want really wouldn't necessarily conflict with one another. You're going to understand these things so completely that you can see, well, if I do option A, then this will happen. If I do option B, this will happen. But I'm going to choose option A because it's going to give me the best bang for my buck. And then you make the decision that way. Do you make decisions that way? Is that why you joined the DPA? Okay. Now, look at another option. You have the boundedly rational decision-making model. Have you come across this in 651 yet? Oh, fantastic. Okay, good. This is all old hat. Posit some people attempt to approximate rationality, but they often cannot always reach maximum utility, so they satisfice. Herbert Simon says satisfice. Anyone know what satisfice is? It's portmanteau. What does satisfice mean, do you think? It means to satisfy preferences sufficiently. You can't satisfy them totally, most often. You have to satisfy them sufficiently. Okay. And so what happens here is that they try to satisfy, they try to maximize utility as much as they can. They can't always reach the goal, and they can't do it for very particular reasons. There's too much information. This is why Crystal has to organize all these files right here, because there's too much information, right? Exactly. You really need to. Right? It's too hard. It's too costly to get, for instance. You can't get everything, so you have to make decisions based upon sometimes impoverished information and incomplete information. Limited time to process information. I think we all know that. Which week in the semester is this? I see some nodding heads right there in agreement. And decision making is complex, so we often have to find ways to make heuristics. If I see a plane fly overhead, that means I must have pizza tonight. Believe it or not, that's an example of a heuristic that can be used to simplify decision making and actually can be used in much more complex situations. You flip a coin. That's a heuristic to aid decision making. But also some people just may want to ignore pieces of information. So I'm going to put you on the spot right here. Using just these two theories as an example, what can you now do to explain why people would be safer with the gain, riskier with a loss, and if they were in the scenario of the sealed room, everyone would actually die? What can you do now to explain those two situations now that you have these up there? And don't be scared. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. Okay, you can hypothesize, which means what? No, it's good. Okay, good. I like it. Yeah.
You can use the bounded rational decision-making model to begin making predictions for different scenarios.
Okay, good. What would happen if? Anyone else? Use one of these things to explain why people are safer with a gain, riskier with a loss, and if they were in that scenario, they would all die. Prediction is wonderful. That's absolutely one of the powers. But you can, yeah, good.
I would think the rational model would be applied to scenario one.
Okay.
Because they're going to maximize their utility if they just know for sure they're going to get $500. Otherwise, it's a 50-50 chance on getting 1,000.
Okay. So you're saying that the rational choice model would explain the scenario one.
Scenario one, where bounded rationality would explain scenario two.
Okay, so bounded rationality would explain scenario 2. So I'm repeating for the people at home too, so I'm just... Yes, why is that? No, sorry, why is that the case? Why?
So I would think that the bounded rationality explains scenario 2 because there is too much information. It's like, well, I've already got $2,000. Do I want to know that I'm going to lose 500, or do I want to take that chance and possibly lose 1,000? There's a 50-50 chance that I might lose 1,000 before I'm going to keep it.
Right, exactly.
So
That's a very good explanation.
you're very limited, or there's just too much information there, so you
Okay.
go with a safer bet.
Okay, good. I like it. What about the third? The sealed room.
And then the third, I didn't take that far.
Okay.
Let's see.
Someone's going to take off the...
Basically on, a very simple example, that if we know everyone else is going to use a rational model to try to save themselves because it's in their benefit to take that breath, we're going to take the breath ourselves
Yeah.
because we don't know that anyone else is going to. It's too hard to think for everybody else's motives to think that there's different
It's,
actions.
oh my goodness, I'm going to slap the table. That's fantastic. It's too hard to think through everyone else's motives, right? So it's too much information. There's limited time to process information. I mean, 2 hours is a long time. Even having those 3 breaths per minute, that becomes a long time. And you have to use heuristics. Exactly right. I gave you these scenarios first, and you had some gut instinct reactions, which are kind of fun. But then by introducing just two theories, you were then able to do something much more sophisticated, which is not bad, considering we've only been talking about it for like 2 minutes. What were you able to do with the introduction of these 2 theories that you were not able to do beforehand? Because you did have predict. Yeah, go ahead. Offer an explanation. And why is that so important, to offer an explanation? Maybe it's a question that's so obvious that it might be. But yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Because it allows us to predict future behavior.
Allows you to predict future behavior. Exactly right. And why might you want to know how something works? Especially public affairs administration, nonprofit administration. Why might you want to know why something works? Yeah.
That way you can make recommendations to policymakers.
Yeah. Yeah.
Set research agendas for the future.
Mm-hmm.
And provide guidance for practitioners.
Right. One of the reasons I don't play the lotto or the lottery is because I know how it works. That I'd rather keep that dollar, or $5 as the case may be. There you go. Yeah, exactly. Right? Those pizzas don't buy themselves, let me tell you. So I'm going to save that money right there. So what we have right here is the importance of theories. And what these scenarios, these fun little scenarios that began to suggest, which actually were a whole research enterprise in political science and economics, it even influenced us over in public administration for quite a time. People were trying to understand, why do people make the decisions they do? What can we predict? How can we design systems that people behave this sort of way? And what this ultimately leads to is the importance of the research questions themselves and what we're ultimately building towards. Something I think that the Dean and Crystal did quite well. Is something one way or the other? Why this instead of that? I don't know. We have to ask the question and study it. How does something work? How does something work? Another one, an extension of that. Why does something work the way that it does? And also, why does one thing happen versus another? Believe it or not, when you get to the dissertation stage, and I'm already making a prediction here, based upon the fully rational model, that everyone here is going to be in the dissertation phase, so you might as well just get this down now, right? All of your research questions will probably end up being more complex versions of one or more of those. Probably. Just more complex versions of it. Why do you think that is? Why do you think that is? Crystal.
Oh.
Sorry.
Sorry, I was distracted.
Jump 10 feet in the air.
Yeah.
Your 2 research questions, are they essentially more complex versions of one or more of these?
How does something work? I think it's the how does something work?
Yeah, exactly.
How does collaboration work in this environment?
Right, and you're being a good sport about it too, exactly, by saying yes. But that's essentially right, is essentially saying, how do these 5 things about collaboration then work with respect to this other thing? So these are absolutely important, and throughout all, theories are essential to guide the process.
Hey, Sean,
Yeah,
is there a way to check, can they hear him okay online? All right, I just wanted to make sure, just because you weren't mine.
Yeah.
Oh, you are mine?
Yeah.
Okay. I missed that.
So another thing is, what is this? You never seen it before? It's a picture of a TV. Okay, fantastic, good. How's it constructed?
It's bounded by a frame.
It's bounded by a frame. Why does it work the way that it does? Witchcraft. Okay, yeah. Pixie dust. Pixie dust. Tinkerbell from Neverland. Neverland. So what were you saying? Okay, good, exactly. Wait, what? Good, fantastic, good. Photon, there you go. And you notice how increasingly complex these are getting. What is this? Okay, great. It's a TV, fantastic. A+. How is it constructed? That is a massive advancement over the answer to the previous question, because there would be many people throughout history, especially prior to 50 years ago or 60 years ago, who would have had no idea what that was. That's a major advancement. And then this third question, the most advanced of all. Why does it work the way that it does? I don't know. I turn it on and I watch Netflix. And Great British Bake Off magically comes on. I don't know how it works. I would have to have what in order to explain why it works the way that it does. Good, that's the right answer. Oh, exactly. Why? Why?
So that you can have a solid foundation and something to back up what you're going to propose. Because if you just say, oh, it includes this, and you have nothing to back that up, then it's just like,
Exactly. Especially when it comes to something like public administration and policy. And that is something that every single person in this room is going to become an expert in. How something works, why something works the way that it does. And with those 2 pieces of information, you can become a policymaker to make a decision to improve things for the better. You can advocate for a policymaker for a particular solution. But you cannot do that without understanding why it works the way that it does. And you cannot understand why something works the way that it does if you don't have theory. Without theory, there is no meat. There is no power to the argument, because otherwise we're just going to be talking about the plastic and the screen and the HD TV forever. And that's wonderful, but eventually if you have to construct a new TV, you're not going to be in a good situation, right? So you do need the theory. So we're going to give you a little bit of snapshot. I'm going to quote Dr. Bland right here. We were at the Midwest Public Affairs Conference. One of my students, Bob Elliott, I think Bob is joining us from online, so I hope his ears are burning right now if he's on. He gave a wonderful presentation at NPAC, and Bob had his conceptual framework up there on the side. And Dr. Bland noticed that, he chuckled, and he says, I can tell your influence. If you can't draw it, it doesn't exist. And I'll show you why this is so important. I'm going to give you a little bit of snapshot of what Bob did. I'm going to show you the end point to see kind of where we're going, and then we're going to walk our way there from there. So again, to see how you end up, and it's always helpful to draw actually what you're talking about. Well, this is related to this, and here are some possible pathways that influence that. It also shows different ways of getting there. This is Bob Elliott's successfully defended proposal for his conceptual framework for his dissertation. And he's borrowing it from Jin et al., McDonald and Park. One reason to go to a conference is, he was able to meet Bruce McDonald, one of the originators of this, and able to have a bit of a chinwag about things. But this is essentially what Bob is testing. He took a framework from Jin et al., which is really trying to understand how public service motivation is going to be affecting certain outcomes of public agencies. So how many of you have encountered public service motivation so far, or the term for it? Okay, a few of you. One of you define PSM for us, please. I don't care who. People raise your hand. You raise your hands. You're going to be okay. You're on the floor now. Someone define PSM. Those you wrote. Or is it just familiarity that you heard the term before? Okay, fantastic. Okay, so public service motivation is this idea that people are going to be drawn to serve in public service out of intrinsic motivators like being drawn to policy making, wanting to serve the public good, and so forth. Why do you think that would be important to have individuals, especially in a nonprofit or a public agency, to have PSM, the desire to serve the public good? Yeah. Ethics?
They'll be more ethical in their decision making.
Okay, yeah, definitely, they could be. Yes? I'm sorry?
Leadership.
Leadership, how so?
Because they're going to have a contagious attitude.
Okay, they could. So if you're very, very, very positive about serving the public, then maybe other people will be have it too and be gung-ho for serving the public, right? Good. Actually, that's part of the thing. Yeah.
I'd say self-motivated.
Okay, self-motivated. Yeah, that's a key part of it. Why is that so important, do you think, self-motivation?
They have a reason for going to work every day. So they have a
Sure.
purpose.
Yes, exactly. And there's a lot of research out there that individuals who exhibit a high level of public service motivation, yes, they're going to care about how much they're paid. Yes, they're going to care about the wonderful severance packages, or not, probably not the severance packages, but the retirement packages and so forth. They're absolutely going to care about that, but there's something more fundamental, more intrinsic about their motivation right there. So you can see that they're trying to say levels of PSM explaining certain outcomes in agencies. More PSM, better outcomes for the agency. It's nice. It's a nice, elegant little thing. And what Bob is doing, essentially, and Bob, hope he's not crossing his eyes right now while he's saying, oh, you're my dissertation chair and you forgot a couple things. But he was trying to say about, person-organization fit, how well someone would fit within an organization, but also military experience and a few other things. And what he's using this, ultimately, is this. So don't get too cross-eyed right here, but this is absolutely fabulous, if I dare say. Bob is essentially testing this. He is trying to understand these outcomes here about how people engage in organizational citizenship and how this affects their promotions. And he's particularly interested in Illinois State police officers, who is actually going to be where he sampled from. And he has all of these other variables right here: military service, organizational commitment, public service motivation, our independent variable, person-organization fit, and a few other things. A lot of lines, a lot of squares, a lot of going back and forth with me by saying, I need to see this visually. You need to show me where your hypotheses are, otherwise I won't know what you're doing. And of course, he goes to MPAC, and no one questions his framework because it's just all there. What does something like this get for you? How do you think this is helping Bob? Other than making me happy, of course.
It's a clear understanding of what he's going to be doing.
Okay, it's a clear understanding of what he's going to be doing, because it is amazing at times, even seeing sometimes published research, in which it's not entirely clear that people were knowing what they're doing. And so by displaying it like this, it's very, very clear he's trying to understand the effect of this on that, and he's going to account for a bunch of other things that he is actually doing statistically. And we're actually walking through that right now. He's using a combination of various statistical methods and has some really intriguing findings. We're going to get him in par for sure. So this is ultimately what you're building up to. So how many of you are a little concerned right now? No one. Okay, good, exactly, because just remember that I said this on this day. 2 years from now, after you all pass, your exam, you'll say, oh wait, Dr. McCandless said I need a framework. Okay, let me start doing this right now. Start working on it now. If you have a very good idea, understand what ultimately do you want to explain. You don't even have to go further than that for now. I mean, what is this, week 4, week 5? I don't know. So week 7, oh, okay, I'm losing out time too. It could be week 12, what do I know? But ultimately, what do you want to explain? Yes?
So essentially, the slide in the deck that I had that had topic and then start on that now.
Yeah,
Because
exactly.
you might know a topic, and then you start narrowing down on the other aspects of it.
Exactly.
So that in and of itself is a little sort of conceptual framework.
Right, exactly. So,
Conceptual framework.
exactly. So ultimately begin thinking like this now. And then what happens is that theories begin to inform possible ways in which these things could be related to one another. Well, that's going to have a positive effect. That's going to have a negative effect, whatever it happens to be. And you know what, and it doesn't just go with statistical methodologies. We're going to be talking about qualitative methodologies there as well, though the qualitative methodologies will still essentially have that logic there. So anyone have any questions about this so far? Good, because you're going to be in class with me in a few semesters. And I'm just giving you fair warning. This is going to be an output of the class. I'm just going to tell you that right now. So just have it ready on day one, and we'll just call it a semester, right? But here's another example. This is one of my favorites. When you take the class with Dr. Blankenberger, the policy class with Dr. Blankenberger, and I think with Dr. Racine, I think maybe even one of you might have written on multiple streams, or at least I recommended it to someone. Did anyone write on MSF for the first assignment? No one? Okay, well, hey, it could be a good surprise. This is actually, some people call it a framework, some people call it a theory, but it's actually really useful, and you will learn it in 653, but it's so elegant. I mean, a lot of people hate it, though, because they think it's too simple, but you know, other people love it because it explains so much. According to these scholars like Zahariadis and John King and so forth, if you want to understand how a policy output was created, they are saying you have to account for what happens in what's called a problem stream, a politics stream, a policy stream, and that what happens is that policy windows open, policy entrepreneurs are able to couple these various streams together, and then the output of it is a policy, whether it's a law, whether it's a decision, whether it's a new rule, and it gives you a list of things to look for. That's the handiest dandy treasure map I've ever seen. Sorry, I nerd out on this. Now, how many of you can think of a policy output, a law, a decision, a rule, that you can use to say this is how it got there? Anyone on the spot? I know there's some ideas out there. Don't be nervous. Yeah, go ahead. What's your name, sir?
Al.
Al, okay, thank you.
I'm in my research area, I'm wanting to look at the Video Gaming Act.
Ooh.
Passed in Illinois, and
Perfect.
this would be a great look at it. The policy output is the way the law is actually written, but from the policy stream and the politics stream in terms of the legislature thinking about their need to capitalize money to pay back bonds for a capital program, to figuring out acceptabilities, technical things about how you create an effective new market to extract money from people that then leads, I guess, to the entrepreneurs or the folks providing the machines, the local governments providing the opportunity to do it, but all of a sudden the policy window where they're actually effective.
That is not bad for hearing about this 60 seconds ago, right? Or you may have heard this before, but that's really good, because what I'm saying though is that you're able to take all of this information that you already had, and what this allows you to do is it allows you to package it in a particular way, speak in a particular format, to ultimately say, in a different way, this is how the output occurred, which is fantastic. It was absolutely fantastic. I mean, so maybe you should look into this. I have a couple of readings for you about this. You were able to do something much more fundamental than you were before. You were able to explain something. Not just that the policy was there, you were able to explain how it got there. Now, of course, you can go into a lot of detail right here. Well, was there a focusing event? There might have been. We don't know. What sort of feedback was there? What sort of indicators went there? And so forth and so on. What was the national mood or the state mood or the national or the party ideology? And then you might find that it only explains so much. It actually only explains 60% of what you want. And that's absolutely fine too. But you start with something like this, and it helps guide the research process in ways that you didn't have before. And ultimately, by the end of chapter 2 in your dissertation, which is usually the literature review, you're going to have your own version of this. You are going to have your own version of this, ideally. So that way you can explain to your committee, who might actually even include people who are not the expert on the specific topic you're talking about, but might be an expert in the methodology. Or talking to people who may have no idea what you're talking about, but you still have to be able to talk to them. And this really helps translate this in some sort of way. And so here's another example. We don't have to talk about policy. We can talk about leadership. Another fun thing. Leadership, an essential ingredient to making any type of agency function well. This is from Mumford et al., their skills model. And what this model basically posits is that if you have individuals with high levels of general cognitive ability, they also have motivation and personality. It'll take for us forever to talk about crystallized cognitive things. We're just not even going to go there. And then they also have problem-solving skills, social judgment skills, and knowledge that they develop through career experiences, but they're also in a conducive environment. Then they tend to make these decisions in ways that lead to effective problem-solving and high performance. It's a leadership model that essentially says leaders who want to have these outcomes of effective problem-solving and performance do these things. They have these attributes, and these are cultivated through career experiences and the environment. You can use this. You could test this. You can use it to explain. One of you, any of you, use it right now to fit in, to the best that you can, how you saw a leader who did that, and these things were present, or another way, you saw a leader who didn't have that, and these things were absent. Yeah, go ahead. Oh, sorry. I thought you were raising your hand, Yeti, sorry. Don't move, otherwise I'll call on you. Yes, go ahead. What's your name again?
Milt.
Milt, okay, thank you, Milt.
Eisenhower.
Okay, good. How so? Lead us through.
Well, from what I understand of his career, he was more behind the scenes and developed big picture skills. And I'm taking a look at the different things that I remember reading about where he seemed to be able to bring an organization together.
Mm-hmm.
And manage detailing.
Okay, good. Again, very, very good. And then you can expand on this in any sort of ways. Exactly, because you ultimately lead back to, well, was there good performance? Well, you could say, yeah, probably. Did he have these other things? Did these things actually lead to these particular outcomes? This allows much more fluidity in talking about leadership than you had before. Why? I know I asked a version of that question 5,000 times already, but I want to repeat it until we start dreaming about it. Why? What does this do that you didn't have before? It gives you the ability to talk it through. Exactly, and to see it and to say, well, no, it's not just that performance magically appears because pixie dust comes out of the air. No, it's because these very particular things led to one another, and this was the result. It's demonstrable, it's testable, and it's something that you can actually use if you needed to a policymaker by saying, hey, you want to have an organization with effective performance, you need leaders who are going to be doing this thing. Incidentally, I didn't make the dean angry. He did say he had to leave early, so just FYI. So, yeah, go ahead.
For each one of these logic models,
Yes.
we would have a definition section explaining what we mean by general cognitive
Exactly.
ability.
Exactly. You would have a general section that would define it, and then also how you're measuring it. Exactly right. That's chapter 3. Any other comments? Good. You could probably see the value of these things and what I'm hopefully building up to right here. So again, what is a theory? It's a description of how something works. Oh, I have a typo in there. That's fun. How something works. An explanation of why it works the way that it does. It's empirically based, means it is based on measurement. Why is that important? A doctorate in public administration is part of the social sciences. So it has to be empirically based. Why is it so important to be able to measure it? Okay, well, I'm sorry, what would you say?
To validate and replicate.
Validate and replicate? Okay, why do we care about that? Why do we care about that?
They want someone to be able to test and retest.
Okay, good, good, exactly. Be able to test and retest. Anyone else? If you're, sorry.
I think you need to measure it to be able to better explain it.
Yes, yes, exactly. You have to be able to measure it in order to better explain. Exactly right. Because what gets measured ultimately gets done. What gets measured ultimately gets done. And of course, it has to be testable and falsifiable. You have to be able to test it. My socks are stolen because Nargles took them. See some Harry Potter fans. Is that testable? Probably not. It's a fun explanation. Luna Lovegood certainly thought that was the case, but it's not really testable right there. Sorry, Harry Potter nerd too. It has to be testable, and it also has to be falsifiable. You have to be able to prove it wrong. Otherwise, it's not a theory. It becomes something else. It becomes either something that's so true, so absolute, that you don't need an explanation for it because that's just the way the reality is. It has to be stated in such a way that you can actually falsify it, give alternative explanations for it. And usable. It has to be a lens to understand what you are seeing. Got that one from Dr. Bland while he was in my office this morning. Liked it so much, I said, I'm putting this in the slide right now. It's a lens to understand what you are seeing. So why is theory important for research? It guides the search for explanations. It informs you what to look for, so that way you're not going up under every rock that comes about there. The theory will tell you, wait a minute, you want to understand leadership. Oh, you need to understand general cognitive ability. You need to understand social judgment skills. You need to understand knowledge. Not just their hair choice, or how tall they are, or that they wear Armani, as the case may be, but all of these other things. It informs what to look for. We ultimately want information on why something works the way that it does, because if we understand the why, we can give better advice, and we need to relate what we're doing to the existing body of knowledge. If it's not related to the existing body of knowledge, it's either something in which there is no existing body of knowledge, such as something like exobiology, but even that has some existing body of knowledge, or it's not sufficiently grounded in the world. We can kind of guess, well, what exactly is going on here? How is this going to inform practice if it's not in touch with reality? So we say, what is a framework? It's a representation of how something is constructed. How the TV is put together is a nice way to describe the framework. A theory is an explanation of why something works the way that it does. I can describe the TV to no end. Trust me, I can. But to explain why it works the way that it does, I have to get into physics, I have to get into engineering, I have to get into economics, quite frankly. Well, it's a model. It's a representation of how an aspect of a larger system works, but in a lot of great detail. And why are these important for research? Because without them, we have little guidance on what we're doing, why we're doing it, what we want to achieve, how we can apply what we learn to practice, and how what we're doing relates to existing knowledge. So let me ask you this. Let me close the door here. Let me just pause here really quickly. How many of you already know what you're going to study, but you're already thinking about why you might need a particular theory, what particular theories might inform what you're looking at? And Crystal, you can't respond. I know you know the answer. Yes, go ahead.
Do you want me to explain what and what I'm...
I want you to explain whatever you want. I like it.
Okay, well, we just did paper, so
Well, the theory evaluation.
I've been thinking through, from a video game standpoint, whether or not gamers themselves are a common pool resource
Ooh, fascinating.
that are somewhat exhaustible, or there's a sustainability point in terms of it,
Right.
and how the video gaming law sets it up to either reach that sustainability or not reach that sustainability.
Right.
It can't be overflowing.
Good, fantastic, fantastic. And it limits what you're doing, but it also gives you the potential to have a nice, solid explanation of what you're talking about. Good, and you'll only refine that over 2 years. It could be. Anyone else? How many of you are particularly interested in understanding how well a policy is working, how well an agency is functioning? You are. What are you interested in?
I'm doing my research on radon testing.
Radon testing.
And what motivates people to test.
Okay, okay. Oh, and that's a key thing. What motivates people to test? You have to look to what in order to find possible explanation. Well, our favorite word, the T word, theory, and so forth. Exactly. You already have some theories in mind?
I already have identified a number of sociodemographic qualities based on theories.
Okay, good, good.
Um,
Good. Good, fantastic, fantastic. Now here's gets really to the meat of what we're talking about here in this portion, because I was given to understand that some people might be a little nervous about theories, or why do I have to use theories? And hopefully this is really demonstrating why theories are absolutely essential to the research process, and why you ultimately do need to develop some sort of framework like this in the end, even whether you draw it or not. Because not only is the best dissertation a done dissertation, it's also one that should solve a puzzle. That by the end of it, and no, this is in quotation marks, Dr. Evil quotation marks, it is the best explanation for something. Or at least the reasonably best. And it should also advance the field. If we already have an answer for something, why do we need a 100-page, several hundred-page document for it? Other than how much fun it would be to write. Well, exactly. Okay, then we probably would need a 200-page document to solve it, because maybe some other answer is wrong. You still have to justify it, right? Okay, fantastic. Yeah, go ahead.
Apply it to a new situation.
There you go, which is actually a slide coming
Right.
up.
Yeah, well, and so my model, tried and true, and 3 or 4 other types of organizations trying it in healthcare now.
There you go. And so a dissertation should advance knowledge about why something works the way that it does, but also how something works and how it can work better. That's the essential components, I think, of a DPA dissertation in particular. You are in the unique position of being able to say, not only here is why something works the way that it does, but here's how you, policymaker, or you, director of this organization, or anyone else can do to improve practice to better engage in public service. One of the powers of a DPA degree. So, it should also describe, indicate how something is put together, explain, articulate why something works the way that it does. It should predict, offer intelligent guesses about what might happen if ... And finally, prescribe, provide reasonable, actionable recommendations for practice, research, theory, and so forth. And you know that practice is first. I call these the 4 criteria. When you get into the class with me, we're going to be going over this a lot. You will be conducting a research project in my class and ultimately advancing a theoretical framework and so forth. So let's talk a little bit about literature reviews. How many of you had a chance to watch the literature review lecture with me? 1. 2.
Was that the one where you group them in a spreadsheet?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that one. It's so memorable. No, just kidding. No, okay, that was good. We're going to review a little bit about that right now. And I'm going to ask you 2 questions. How was your day and why? There's a reason for this. I'm going to call on someone. Amy. Amy, how was your day?
Very long.
It's very long. Why?
11 trainees under my watch.
You had 11 trainings? Yeah. We actually have an office just on the same floor, too. So, anyone else? How was your day and why? Yes.
My day was fantastic. I got a lot accomplished today.
Fantastic. What'd you get accomplished?
Checklist. Created 4 jobs, 2 more actually, so 6 jobs.
You created them? Oh, good. Wow.
And then I was able to send out 15 emails that I forgot to send out yesterday. So, there's that. And then being able to be here. It's
Fantastic.
on the list, so just checking things off the list.
And also another dissertation advisee, I might add. So you had about the conceptual frameworks, so that's good. Believe it or not, if you can answer these 2 questions, you can conduct a literature review. Believe it or not. And what is a literature review? Why is a literature review one whole chapter out of a 5-chapter dissertation? I had a lot of empirical articles have those literature reviews, I think.
It discusses what's already out there about the topic that you're going to discuss.
Yes, and it advances ultimately the framework that you're going to test. So it's absolutely essential to get right. So watch that lecture. If you can't get enough of the sound of my voice, there's 2 hours of it in permanent recorded mode, so you can have it right there. But here's why. If you can answer these questions, you can conduct a literature review. Because here's why. Imagine those are 5 separate studies. I'm a little colorblind, so they could be a different color, and I don't know. But generally, are they all the same color? Okay, fantastic, good. You could say the literature is unanimous in agreeing that blank. Why is it so important to be able to say that? You read 5 studies. But why is it so important to be able to have a 1-sentence takeaway? Other than the fact that a lot of people have the attention span of fruit flies. And I include myself in that, I might add. Ooh, look, someone outside. I'm sorry. Why is it so important to be able to reduce 5 studies, or 50 studies, or 100 studies to 1 sentence or few? Strength in numbers? Okay, what do you mean by that?
Well, if everybody says the same thing, there's validity.
Okay, good. If everyone says the same thing, there's validity to it. Okay, I like. What else?
It synthesizes the literature, so someone
Synthesizes the literature. Exactly right. It synthesizes the literature. Have you ever, besides today, have you ever been in a lecture that was just interminable and you just wondered what the point was? And again, this doesn't count. This is the best lecture of all time. You've been in this situation, or you're in a conversation with someone, and they just keep telling the story, and it's like, will you get to the point? They say, this really funny thing happens, and then 9 hours later, you're thinking, well, you never told me about it. That's essentially what a literature review has to do. It has to look across all of these different things, and you get your 1-sentence takeaway of saying, this is what the literature says overall. And if you know what the literature says overall, you are much step closer to building, well, here's how the different pieces relate to one another. We're going to look at some samples here in a second, so you know that I'm not lying about that. Okay, ooh, the color's changed. What's going on now? Imagine these are individual studies. Yes?
The view of the topic is divided.
View of the topic is divided. Okay, fantastic. It's mostly this. There's a fair amount of that other part, right? Literature largely note X, but a significant portion notes Y. Why is that important? There's not uniformity in the literature, but why is it important to state it? Okay, you need both perspectives, exactly. Why? You notice that's my favorite question. Why do you need both perspectives? Anyone. I think Dan?
You need to acknowledge what is not consistent with your thoughts, or somebody else will.
Exactly, right, exactly. And if you want to test this, what exactly is true? What exactly is the explanation? You have to account for the fact that there is some disagreement out there. And every single one of you will encounter that. I know that Crystal and Carrie have already encountered that a little bit too, about competing explanations for it. So what we're going to do right now, we're going to look at a sample. So the printer was being problematic, but you can also find a version of this on Blackboard. So unfortunately, each group is going to have to share one. There you go. And so people at home, this is on the Blackboard website. Oh, okay, perfect, thank you. There you go. Oh my goodness, I think I'm gonna have enough. Please, yeah. There you go. I'll give one to you too. Okay, so here's what I would like you to do. This is I think one of the best literature reviews ever written, because it does so many things so well. So I'm already biasing the results a little bit by telling you I think it's the best of all ever. But what I'd like you to do, skim through this. We're going to take a few minutes to do this. Everyone at home do this too. Everyone do this too. So you ask yourself, what does the first paragraph accomplish on this page? What does the second paragraph accomplish? What which is the third. Flip over the page, read Status of Latino Youth. And what I'd like you to do is examine how this section is structured, and also what does the final paragraph on page 105 do. And then if you feel really adventurous, skip over to table 1 on page 109. So let's take a few minutes to do that. Skim through this, read the first 3 paragraphs, flip over, understand how the Status of Latino Youth section is being organized, and then if you have time, go to table 1. And we're going to talk. Okay, let me put the heat on. Wherever you're at, flip the page over to page 105. I think a lot of people are on the front page. I'm doing this intentionally. Read just the first sentence of every paragraph, and then read the last paragraph on page 105 in its entirety. Okay, all right. So why do you think I had you read those particular elements? My favorite question, why? Why do you think I had you read those particular elements?
See a good model.
Good model, yep. And why is it a good model?
Why is this a good model?
Yes.
It talks about why it's important, and then the problem statement, and then a summary of what it's going to cover.
Good, fantastic. Anyone else?
It has some pieces of what is expected in the dissertation.
Yes, there you go. It's a good model because it has the pieces that are expected in the dissertation. And it advances a model that is testable. It actually begins to give explanations that are actually testable. And so what we're going to do right here, everyone has their own copy. Those at home, this is under the Latino Youth article, so you don't have to squint at what's going on right here, but I'm going to try to blow this up a little bit. There's a couple of key things that I really want you to see. This first paragraph does... Yeah, there we go. This first paragraph does what? Okay, it's an introduction. It's a very particular type of introduction, though. Identifies the problem, exactly.
Why?
The why. Yeah, identifies the problem. I love it. This second paragraph, I'm just going to tell you right now, if I'm your dissertation chair or I'm going to be on your dissertation committee, I'm going to want this, not this exact second paragraph, I'm going to want this second paragraph in there. I will. What does this second paragraph do? It's probably the most important one up there. It summarizes the research. Exactly right. Taken as a whole, here is the 30-second explanation of what the literature says overall. If that were not there, if these sort of things were not there in literature reviews, it would be almost unreadable. And of course, then you have essentially the framework from where it goes from there. Now, when you go to the second page, here's something that's really important. I stopped you. Many of you were still on the first page, and I stopped you and I said, read the first sentence of every single paragraph and then read the last one. Those first sentences do what? Summarize the section. Yeah, they tell you exactly what the literature says and how well it says it. And everything else is a justification of that. And then this final, this final paragraph ends it, yes, and it sums it up in a very particular way. How? Relevance. Wait, who said that? Relevance. Okay, relevant. It establishes the relevance of the topic. What else does it do? Identifies a gap. Right. And why is identifying a gap so important? Why is it so important to identify a gap? Yeah, it's the gap that they're going to fill in, that they are going to test to say, here is what is within this gap. And this is a practice-oriented article, because they say when you fill this gap, this particular population is going to be able to be served better. And then if you read through this, what happens at the end of this, on table 1, they have the ecological framework of Latino youth relationships. Context of exit, context of entry, cultural orientation, family context, school context, youth well-being. It's essentially a list of things to look out for based upon the literature of this could happen to this particular population. Here's what could happen in terms of context of exit that could affect their well-being, all the way over to mental health system, substance use, and adult role-taking. By the end of this literature review, If you did this literature review, you would be able to do what that you could not do before? You could do what that you could not do before?
You could summarize what you learned in the history of the literature, but also then talk about how you're going to advance, what it is you're studying.
And that's the key part, exactly. You summarize, but you in advance what your study is going to be about. Because based upon this, you can actually say, you want to study the effect of this on well-being. You have to define well-being. You have to define this. But you're a lot closer to actually having a research project that's doable. And you do this by going through the literature review and ultimately building it up to something like this. What is the best explanation for something, and how can we have it testable? So what I'm going to ask you to do, because we're having so much fun here that I want to make sure that we're able to get to some other things that we're going to be doing, is just, okay, 1 second. Here we go. All right. Is literature review should indicate what the literature says overall about a topic, articulate the major categories of literature, that is the topics, the subtopics, right there. State the major themes, what the literature says occurs regarding a topic, what the literature says overall regarding a topic. You should be able to summarize that in 1 to 2 sentences. What does the literature on X say about this other thing? And every single one of you, as you go through your classes in the DPA program, I encourage you to do that. Anytime you read something, what is the 30-second takeaway? And again, it's not just because people have short attention spans. It's also because this is ultimately what you're going to be examining, what you're going to be testing, and it's the big takeaway of what should happen with the research. And the specific studies are used as examples of the theme in the same way that we had the colored blocks. Uniformity, disagreement, half and half. We ultimately want that. Because you need to know what most research is on, what is missing, why something is missing, the consequences of it missing, and what you might predict based upon the literature. That's something this article did particularly well. Use as an example when you conduct your own literature reviews of what you're ultimately trying to build up to. And it will capture what you will test. By the end of the literature review, you're ultimately saying, this is how the pieces work together. We're actually going to practice this in a second. Because ultimately what you're doing a process of inductive reasoning and deductive reasoning. You can look at the slide a little bit more at home, but in finding these major themes, you're using inductive reasoning. You're going from particulars to generalities. Why? How? Because you're looking at a lot of different studies and saying, here's what they say overall, here's the theme across all of these. And then if you use deductive, you're determining, well, what will be in this gap based upon my knowledge of the theme. But you have to understand what it says overall. So how many of you are going to change anything about how you read now? Hopefully everyone. Unless you're already doing this and just like, well, of course, Dr. McCandless, I already do this. But that's okay, because I didn't know this. I certainly didn't. It just changed the way I thought about this. So go ahead and read those other articles that I had on Blackboard, the Write It All, the I Said It All, the Choi articles, because they're essentially going to be doing the same thing again and again and again. And this is one of the deep, dark secrets also about completing a dissertation, is the more you read, actually the better you are going to be at writing it, because you see more examples. Because ultimately what you're leading toward is this. The DPA dissertation guidelines, why this ultimately matters. Because you might find yourself that you want to engage in traditional theory testing for your dissertation. You might want to evaluate the universal effectiveness of a public policy, or you want to give objective descriptions. Or you might want to be more interpretivist and postmodern. You might want to develop a solution to a local problem or issue, or engage in some sort of hermeneutic understanding, phenomenology, and native inquiry. I'm surprised I was able to get those out without tripping over my words. But let me distill the essence of this to just a few things for you to think about. Ultimately, what you're really deciding upon is what you know, what you think you can measure, And how do you know what you know? Here's what I mean by that. Do you think, for instance, that you can measure everything? Everything is going to be measurable. You can assign a number to it. Well, that lends itself to certain types of methodologies. You think that not everything can be measured? Well, that lends itself to certain types of methodologies as well. Because you might end up doing quantitative research or an ethnography or a case study. Digest this at home, but let me give you the essence of what this is. I'm going to give you a few different ways in which discovering your research question could happen. Because you notice I haven't really talked a lot about discovering the research question yet. A lot of it so far has been about, here's the importance of theory. Here's how literature reviews are constructed. And it's a very particular reason. Because in many ways, you don't just sit down and you write the literature review. I don't know about you, my literature review came to me when I was driving down I-25 to campus. It just hit on me one day. Well, not hit on me, I mean, it came to me, I should say. Because I had thought about it so much, about what the literature said overall. And I had an idea of this, of the different approaches I wanted to take. And believe it or not, developing the research question also requires knowledge of different approaches to take. And here's what I mean by this. You could have a top-down literature review. I have a couple graphics for this. You can have it horizontal, bottom-up, in-depth exploration, or theory-informed and practice-oriented. So here's top-down. Top-down is perhaps the most traditional way of doing a dissertation. It's the most traditional way of creating a research question, too, because they go hand in hand. It's testing and improving a theory. It is finding something a theory cannot explain. You choose a theory, and you say, how well is it explaining something in the real world? If you find something that it cannot explain, then you test what could possibly be within that gap. And you close the gap and you say, the theory now explains this particular thing. That's the most traditional way of doing it. It's a very top-down way. And here's an example of it. How many of you heard the theory of transformational leadership? One of the most impactful leadership theories out there. And this is essentially the model right here. It says that a leader can act in a transformational way to influence performance beyond expectations in followers if the leader has very transactional styles, but then also gives idealized influence, inspirational motivation, intellectual stimulation, and individualized consideration. A leader that does these things in addition to the basic transactions will influence people to perform better than what they did before. It's inspiring, right? It's a theory. One example of a dissertation, and this is a real one, that could come out of this, is you say, well, wait a minute. The theory doesn't explain what happens in this particular circumstance, or at least doesn't happen. So I want to try to improve that theory in order to better explain some phenomenon. And this is, again, I had to change some of the words here, but this is essentially what it was. It says, predicts that idealized influence, inspirational motivation, intellectual stimulation, and individualized consideration, when added to these styles, will result in performance beyond expectations. However, the theory at present has not fully examined the mechanisms of intellectual stimulation. What does that mean? What do you think that means? Yes, go ahead.
There is, you're missing the how.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It was just saying there is this idea here that this thing is there. It works with the others, and then boom, you have performance beyond expectation. What this person did is they say, okay, I am going to explore this. I'm going to fill that gap in the theory because the theory cannot explain how that happens. It just says it's there. It cannot explain how it's happened. So what this person did, they said, I'm going to fill that gap. I'm going to see actually how it works. And they took survey data from 1,000 different public services across the United States to indicate here is how it works. And then now that you have that gap filled, you could test in another circumstance, another circumstance. How many of you are thinking you might want a dissertation like that? You choose a theory, how well does it explain something, and you want to see what the gap is. It's okay to say no. That's one of the great things about a DPA is you don't have to do this. There are a lot of programs where we say you have to do exactly this and nothing else. But you were thinking about maybe that? Okay, yeah. Why is that?
Oh, boy. Through the wire. I'm not sure why.
Okay. You have 2 years to think about it. But let me give you another example. You're not beholden to this. Here's another example. The horizontal. Testing theory in a new way is actually what one of my students, Bob Elliott, is doing. It's wonderful. Perfectly legitimate way of doing research. A theory has only ever examined X, whatever X happens to be. You want it to use to explain something else, and maybe add a few new elements to it. Bob is really interested in public service motivation and how it affects particular outcomes. But what he wanted to examine is it hadn't really been examined too often in police. And it hadn't accounted for, at least in the way he wanted to, it hadn't really accounted for military experience. So he said, there's this wonderful framework out there by Jin et al., but it hasn't been applied to this other population, and it doesn't have this other element. So I'm going to see how it applies to this other population and add this other element. How many of you are thinking about doing something like that? Or does that sound appealing? No one. It's okay. Like I said, you have 2 years to think about it. But it's basically you do need to begin to think about these theories right here. Exactly what Bob did. Another possibility, bottom up. No theory explains or sufficiently explains why. So you want to build a theory from the ground up and propose new theoretical possibilities. You want to generate theory from data, which is also useful for generating hypotheses, and you can use multiple theories to guide the process. And here's an example of that. A little bit complex, but ultimately, you begin by identifying who you want to study. And then you go out there and you collect data about these people or the population. You analyze it, and then you develop it from the ground up of saying, based upon these 50, 100 people you interviewed about their experiences, what are the common patterns within that? And you go back and you go to iteration. You have theory saturation, which means you can stop collecting data when you start hearing the same thing again and again and again. And I notice some nodding heads here. I think people are liking this one. How many of you are thinking about doing something like this? Amy, you're nodding your head.
I mean, I have a framework, but this makes sense.
Okay. Why does it make sense to you? If you don't mind my asking.
Well, I mean, the program that we have is really unique to the country. So, you know, we have some data, but it only explains, like, we're looking at retention.
Yeah.
But it doesn't explain other things, so.
Yeah. So this is a very grounded approach. Good. Fantastic. And again, if you don't want me to call on you, just don't move. It's bad. But here's another example of that. An example of this bottom-up approach. Someone used it to discuss the various aspects of what people go through in cancer treatment. And so what they're ultimately trying to inform cancer treatment. And they're trying to say, well, what goes on within the survivability and the emotional and psychological impacts that people go through with cancer treatment. And what they're saying, building from the ground up, interviewing a bunch of people who were undergoing cancer treatment. What were the commonalities they were saying? And how do these various things relate to one another? Saying things like, well, decision-making had an effect, but prognosis, if you have hope and trust, this could have particular effects on cancer treatment. You have particular types of spirituality, this could affect hope and trust, which then affects cancer treatment. Yeah, go ahead.
This appears to be very inductive.
Very inductive. The other one is deductive.
Well,
Fantastic.
and this is kosher.
Yeah, absolutely it is.
I characterize it as observing the gorillas to understand the behavior.
Exactly. I'm sure Jane Goodall would be very happy about that, but exactly. Dr. Bland, that is correct. A grounded, hey, there he said yes, there we go, fantastic. A lot of you are saying, yes, this is my methodology now. Because this is another way of finding the research question, too. Because the deductive approach, sorry, let me go back here. The deductive approach is very helpful for finding the research question because you take the theory, You find what the theory does not explain, and that gives you your research question. What's there? Exactly, right? Whereas something like this, your research question comes about by saying, well, we don't know a lot of what is going on there. What happens with people's cancer treatment? What do they experience and so forth? That's another possibility. This other one, they had another model. Yeah, I heard a woo. Yes, this is the joys of research. Much like the joys of painting, the joys of research. Can have a Bob Ross special about this. What we have right here, here's all the things that goes into cancer treatment right here. And again, what do these people do? They interviewed a bunch of people about their cancer treatments, and these were the charts of the patterns that emerged. When no theory sufficiently explains by itself what these people are going to go through. You can build it from the ground up. Because you want to understand the holism of the phenomenon, not just what a particular theory might predict. There's another possibility. In-depth exploration. Well, actually, they're all in-depth explanations, but this is a really in-depth explanation. It's a foot wide and 25 miles deep sort of deep explanation, in which you want to explore how a case or a small number of cases operate and then relate these cases to a larger phenomenon. Here's an example. Case study approach, or collective case study approach as the case may be. Again, perfectly fine. Right? Okay, there we go. He's not. Dr. Bland's nodding again. In which you have your theory at the beginning. You select particular cases, and you conduct case studies. What is going on in this particular case about the issue that you're going to be talking about? And then, if you want to have multiple cases, well, you write an individual case report for one case, an individual case report for another case, conduct any remaining studies and write the individual case reports for them, and then you compare them across cross-case conclusions, modifying your theory, developing your policy recommendations. This is a classic way of doing a dissertation and absolutely compatible with doing a DPA. Because why might you want to do something like a case study, an in-depth exploration of something, versus a survey of 1,000 different people? Again, both legitimate ways of doing it. But why might you want to do it? Yeah, go ahead.
I would think that case study would come about where you can look at more complex phenomenon, and
Yes.
you already have a sense of what's going on.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, good. Yes, I love it. Yeah.
Maybe there aren't a lot of examples out there.
Yeah.
If you want to look at it, very, very in-depth go after those cases.
Exactly right. Exactly right. And that's one of the things you'll be learning in 655, I think is the class I'm teaching with me. I used to teach the stats class, and then I'm switching to the qual class because I could teach both, because why not? And it'll be a lot of fun. This is one of the things we'll be doing, is doing case studies and the selection criteria for this. So you'll be getting a lot of Any of you respond? Yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say, maybe you're looking at an outlier. You need to know what's
Yes, you could be looking at an outlier. And why might you want to know what's happening with an outlier?
outliers could tell a story that you just can't.
Yes, exactly. They don't just skew the data one way. They could actually give you important information. They're not just things that you just drop from a data set because they're inconvenient. Exactly. I love that answer. Thank you. Yes, Yeti.
There's also the case of, I like to use analogy of being in and out.
Yeah.
When you look at the question, investigate the question from a broader perspective, you might get the answers, but they might not be sufficient in explaining
Right.
in-depth aspects of what you're looking at.
Exactly.
So the case study gives you the opportunity to then go into
Exactly. Exactly. And look at these causal mechanisms within the case itself. Relate it to a larger phenomenon. And you don't have to necessarily worry about generalizability either. Everyone talks about, oh, generalizability. Well, sometimes you don't need to generalize. Sometimes you really just need to understand what's in front of you. You need to say it's a typical case. Maybe it isn't a typical case. Maybe it is an outlier. We want to know what happens with the outliers, quite frankly. Outliers are very important for public service because outliers may be people who are getting served too well or not served enough. And you want to know what their experiences are like, not just the typical person. Other things to think about. And so you can also have theory-informed or practice-oriented, which is really just any combination of the previous ones, but with a particular emphasis on translating findings to improving practice, not necessarily improving theory itself. All of you are going to be working with theory. All of you are going to be using theory to select cases and understand what's going on. Some of you may not be testing theory. Some of you may not be building theory from the ground up. Some of you may be using theory to really just understand what could be going on, and then you investigate possible explanations for that. And many DPA dissertations are of this variety, but the reality is there's all of them, all of those varieties. Bob, like I said, is doing a more horizontally oriented one. I probably have one coming up that's going to be much more top-down. But it depends on what you want ultimately to explain. But without theory, it'd be hard to focus the inquiry. And this is essentially what this looks like. Many DPA dissertations, and again, this is a vast simplification. This is my simplification. Ultimately, try to do something like this. Extremely valuable for practice. Trying to understand how some sort of output or outcome happens. And then understanding what happens within agencies, public agencies, nonprofit agencies, both, that explains how that outcome occurs. How many of you are responding to this possibility? Yeah, I see much more nodding heads. Someone want to feel brave and tell me what they're thinking? Yeah, go ahead.
So I'm going to be looking at, so I work in government, so juvenile diversion program, studying a diversion program, comparing that to a probation program or agency.
Right.
Looking at the outcomes of how youth may have displayed some changes, basically towards improvement. Looking to see recidivism could be one of the variables that we actually study. So something like that is what I'm looking for.
Exactly, so you're not necessarily doing that top-down theory testing. You're using theory to inform what you're looking for, but you're not beholden to that. It's much more about investigating the process. What exactly is going on? Is this making sense? Good. I can't tell if you're just stunned, like, oh my God, I wish you'd shut up right now. But here's what we're going to do. We have a few minutes left. We have 7 minutes left. I handed you out a case study, and it's called XYZ. What I would like you to do, and we'll see how much time we have for this. Let's spend about 4 minutes doing this. Look at this case. Oh, sorry, you need one. Look at this case. And then fit it into this model. Very vague. Wonderfully vague. I love vague assignments. My grading's never vague, though. Let's go ahead and talk. It's a fun case. It's actually real, too. Names changed to protect anonymity. Sorry, did someone have a question about it? You guys are from Illinois. No, it's not from Illinois. It is from a western state. It's not Colorado. So, no, it's a real case. It's information I had gathered. I'm actually going to be converting this into a case study for JPA, Journal of Public Affairs Education. I already have another one in there. So many of your dissertations might end up taking the form of something, believe it or not, like this, which could be ideal. Why do you think I'm saying that? It could take the form of something like this. I mean, obviously it's not going to be 2 pages long, but... Yeah, exactly. It is investigating what's happening in the black box. I love it. With a particular agency, with a particular goal of understanding why is something not working, what's causing it, what can be done to improve it. Okay, so what I'd like to do here, I'd like everyone to talk about this. Outputs and outcomes. This is essentially what is the agency creating and what are the longitudinal effects of what's happening. It's a problem, and you word it as a problem statement. What is the problem with XYZ? It's like that wonderful line from Office Space where the character says, what exactly do you do here? What is the problem? Yeah, so I love that movie. I'm going to find a reason to show it in the class. I will. Yes?
That despite changes, productivity and agency will not come out the point that
Okay, so you were saying that the overall problem is that productivity is on the decline. Which, okay, good. Good. How many of you said something else? You said something else?
the problem is that
Okay. All right, good. Good. You're both right, yeah.
there's a system disruption.
There's a what disruption?
System disruption.
Okay, tell me about that.
There was a system in place, and Director Doan has come in, and his changes have disrupted that system. And that is leading to a loss of productivity.
Okay. Okay, sorry, go ahead.
Because he plays favorites.
He plays favorites. Okay, so all of these answers are correct. And it depends on what you want to define as the ultimate problem. Because you do have to delimit them somewhere. Probably the largest problem, though, is that issue of productivity. Why? That's probably the largest ultimate problem of it. Because it is a public agency. Why is the issue of productivity not serving citizen well? Why is that the ultimate problem?
Efficiency in government is expected in all agencies.
Yes, efficiency, effectiveness, economy, and social equity, too. Exactly right. And every other answer was correct, though, too. It just depends on where you want to focus it. Do you want to focus it on here is the big longitudinal problem? Or do you want to focus on this other problem right there? So everything that everyone said was correct. It just depends on where you want to focus it and how much time you have left on your dissertation, quite frankly. Okay, good. Yeah, but let's just go with the issue of productivity, just for fun. So you start there. That's the problem. The output, that's the outcome, ultimately. The output is eventually going to be these particular types of behaviors that lead to the lack of productivity. But what's going on here in this black box, based upon this two-page description, what is going on in terms of management, leadership, people, and followership, and capacity? That is the resources they have, the ability to get work done. What's going on there that's contributing to this problem?
Seems like favoritism,
Favoritism?
lack of knowledge,
Lack of knowledge?
lack of cohesion,
Yeah. Lack of trust, new systems,
Change in culture.
change in culture, good, fantastic. That's all going in within this black box. The systems model is very helpful right here because it forces you to think as if an agency were an organism, just like we are. Everyone raise their right hand. Good, you just demonstrated the validity of this. How? Okay, yeah, you do. But also, this posits that agencies in many ways are like organisms. The output that you had was raising your right hand. How did you know how to raise your right hand? Amuse me, come on, amuse me. It's 8 o'clock at night.
We heard it in our ears.
Yes, exactly, exactly.
It's our brain, it's our eyes.
Exactly. Exactly what happened. You're in this wonderful environment, the new student union, the history of it right there. It's a wonderful space. I can run all up and down here, burning 1,000 calories just giving this lecture alone. You're in the environment right here. You hear the input, the sound of my voice. You process it in your brains, the black box. And then you produce the output. Raise your right hand. And the outcome, I'm happy, perhaps too joyously happy that you raised your right hand. Whoop-de-doo. But believe it or not, this demonstrates the validity of this theory right here. And agencies are the same thing. They exist within some sort of environment of laws, economics, history. They take in particular inputs in terms of budgets, legal requirements, expectations from the community, whatever it happens to be. They process those inputs within the black box, a combination of management, leadership, people, and capacity. They produce some sort of output. It has an outcome, it's feedback, and then the system keeps rolling. How many of you are seeing this now, in this way, as a legitimate way to do your dissertation? I've seen a lot of nodding heads. So here's the thing. I asked you for 5 more minutes. Ooh, all right, good, sweet. And here's sort of the answer to discovering the research question. We have talked a lot about theory, conducting literature reviews, even different ways of doing it. Do you want to have a top-down approach, horizontal, bottom-up, whatever it happens to be? Because when you know the theory, you know what the literature says, the question will actually dawn on you, believe it or not. Because to remind, many research questions have pattern. Is something one way or another? How does it work? Why does something work the way that it does? Why does one thing happen versus another? Because research questions for dissertations, here's part of the deep, dark secret of it. Very often, they will come to you in a moment of inspiration. You were driving in the car. You were making food. You were putting on your shoes. You're watching Great British Bake Off. I have 2 episodes to catch up on. Don't ruin it for me. I know some of you watch it. That's why I'm saying it. But it only comes in inspiration when you have processed something for such a long time that it bursts forward into your consciousness in order to do it. You just have to process these things in a very particular way. And you process them by thinking about, how does this work? So regardless of which approach you have to do, you still have to think in terms of theory. What does theory currently explain about this, and what does it not explain? And of course, the research questions are rooted, but seek to expand upon what we already know about a phenomenon. So you have to know the literature. Read, 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 read. That's the raw material for dissertation research questions. The result of deep thinking about what we ultimately want to explain. You're not trying to just describe something. That's fun. But, you can go to the movies and you can say, here's what Star Wars, what happened. You can describe it in wonderfully tedious detail and lose all of your friends. But you want to explain, why is this working the way that it does? That's what you're ultimately going for. Tell yourself that again and again and again. What do you want to explain? And when you word it as, this is the explanation for this, or how does this work, then you're on the right track. Because also research questions for dissertations do not already have the answers. Or if they do propose answers, as our colleague back here said, maybe they're wrong. We have to prove that they're wrong, demonstrate that they're wrong first. But that's absolutely correct. And are things we need to understand in order to improve the field? Because that's the big thing that you need to do. For a DPA dissertation, you are improving, of course, research and theory and so forth. But you also have that additional responsibility, which quite frankly a lot of doctorates don't have, I'm just going to be honest about it, of improving practice. And I'm not just saying that as hyperbole. I mean, it is a professionally oriented doctorate meant to improve the delivery of services. So everyone is essentially better off. And of course, you've also accounted for confirmation bias, that anything that you ultimately lead to is not just what we want to see. And ultimately, when we come back next time, and I hope I haven't scared you all off, we're going to be talking about this, taking these conceptual frameworks and then leading them to become our hypotheses. Because when we ultimately have what we want to measure here at the end, we want to understand whatever CRM orientation is, whatever this thing happens with an agency, we have all of our little boxes and arrows. We're able to develop reasonable, testable guesses about what might be there. And that's what we're going to discuss next time. But it all begins here with these conceptual frameworks. Or to remind us about Bob Elliott, I'm sorry, I'm just so proud of my student, I really am. You can have something like this. Whether it looks like this, whether it looks a little different, whether you draw it or not, it doesn't even matter if you draw it or not, but you still need to have a version of this there. So next time, crafting hypotheses, using literature to find it, we're going to talk about necessity and sufficiency and family resemblance. It's going to be a lot of fun. I'm not kidding about that there, but even if you didn't like it, we still have food there, so come for that. And that's it. All right.
He's pretty passionate about what he does, isn't he? Wow. Okay. Hopefully you enjoyed that. I know that we are asking you to be here twice this week, so we do value your time. Hopefully you got a lot out of that. Just want to direct you to a couple things. Make sure you're making note of the calendar, which is linked on Blackboard. There will be some dissertation proposal defenses coming up and some other things. You'll want to attend those. Feedback. I'm going to be sending an email tomorrow about feedback for the specifically for the 2019 cohort on your onboarding experience with the DPA. If there's anything that you need that you're not getting support from the program, that's where you need to let us know, because we want that type of feedback. And third thing, now I know that we had talks with each one of you, and one of the questions I ask is whether you wanted to teach or not, or you wanted to stay in practice. Most of us want to stay in practice, or most of you wanted to stay in practice, but we are going to be offering some opportunities to gain some credentials in teaching and have some opportunities there. So if you are interested in teaching ever, in the email that I send you tomorrow, let me know, and then I'll make you aware of the opportunities that are there. And the final thing, because I know we want to go, who's a member of ASPA, American Society for Public Administration? If you are not, you should be. I'll be sending information on that tomorrow as well with the email, so be looking out for that. All right, thanks guys.